Hello, I'm Michael Wilds. Today we're inside a Nuke and we're going to be going through how I composited my renders to make them look slightly less crap. I am not a compositor by any means, but I know how to do a few things inside of Nuke. Not the technical way, but enough to make things look better. So cool, if that sounds of interest, stick around and hopefully you'll learn a few things. Cool, let's get started. This is the comp. So as you can see, I've added some depth of field, pumped up some of the values and stuff like that. And yeah, same with this one. So nothing too major. We've got a little bit of chromatic aberration as well. You can see around the ears. So I'm just going to go through how I created that. Maybe it'll be something useful to you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you don't need this. But I thought I'd create it from scratch and show how I do it. So what I've got here is really basic renders. I've got my beauty and I've got a Z-depth. I stupidly didn't render them together, so I'm going to have to shuffle them in together so that the ZD Focus can use it. If you were smarter than me and decided to put all your AOVs together in a single file when you render out, then you won't have this issue. But what we're going to do is we're just going to start with this and hopefully get this thing a little bit nicer. Cool, so first of all, easiest thing to do is I want to get the depth of field going just to see how much better that makes it. So what I can do is I can press tab and then go to ZD Focus, which is a way to use a Z depth to control the depth of field on this. So as you can see, it's already done something for me. We've got this little point here called focal point. We can place that somewhere on the image and that will read the focal point of that. The problem is at the moment, this isn't doing anything. So what you can do is when you do the ZD Focus is you can change on the right hand side, you've got this output. Instead of seeing the result, which is what the ZD Focus is doing to it, you can go to focal plane setup and this will show you what's in focus, what's out of focus and where your focus point is. So no matter what I do, if I change any of these things, it's not doing anything because it's not picking up my Z depth data. So what I need to do is this, if I view this, press 1 on this render layer, you can see in the bottom right, my values are changing. And this is basically the depth of the image. So I need to get this in here. So I'm going to go shuffle copy because I want to shuffle the data from this render pass into this one so that my ZD Focus can pick up that data. Cool. So I'm going to have this as 1 and I'm going to have this as 2 and then I'm going to put my ZD Focus into that instead. The shuffle copy and the shuffle node can be a little bit intimidating and they took me a good few years to work out. But when you know that, you've basically cracked Nuke. So all it is it's this grid system and you're basically shuffling or changing channels of your image into other channels so you can move data along. Say, for example, you wanted your red channel to be your green channel, or in this instance, we want one image's Z-depth to be another image's Z-depth. Cool. So in 1, we've got this cat. In 2, we've got my Z-depth. So I'm going to view this shuffle copy. And as you can see, it's taking the RGB and outputting the RGB of this one, which I don't want. I want the RGB of 1. So you can see here I've got RGB of 2 and it's going out into my output of RGB. So if I change that now from the RGB of 1, then that's going to bring back my image, which is great. So what I need is I need the Z depth of 2. But if we look back at this image, you can see that it's not actually the Z depth. This is just the red, green, and blue channel. So this is, I need to pick one of these. So either the red, the green, and the blue, and then I need to shuffle that into my image's Z depth. Little confusing. Honestly, this node is a bit of a nightmare, but when you get used to it, you really do get used to it. So I want to take, say, for example, my red channel, and I want to shuffle this. We're going to use this bit down here for a different attribute, and I want to shuffle this into my depth channel. So I've clicked that and now it's automatically assigned this into the Z depth. So let's have a look if that works. I could change it to any of these. It really doesn't matter because that information is in all 3 of the image channels. If we view that now, and if I move this focal plane, you can see that it's actually affecting it now, which is great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to my ZD Focus and I'm going to change this to result instead. And I'm going to start just playing around with these values. So I'm going to make the size of it, let's do that as 20 just for now. And I'm going to make the maximum a little bit less because that's giving me weird results. Let's change that to 5. You know what, let's up this quite a bit more. So there we go. If we change that size to 100 and then maximum to 10, is that going to give me? There we go, that's better. The maximum was too high, which is why it was giving me that weird edge. And what I can also do is if I switch back to focal plane setup, I can change the depth of field. So at the moment, there's green basically means what's in focus. And there was only a really thin line, but I can change that. So if I now go back to result, all this part is going to be in focus perfectly, and the ears are going to stay out of focus, which I quite like. So I kind of want to draw that maybe backwards ever so slightly. So I'm going to just move this focal point. You can also just change this value here. So I can change this to 10 and see how that's looking. I want this ear to be in focus a little bit. So 10 was too low, maybe 14. No, that's too high. So if we click, let's go there. Maybe a little bit further. Closer. Yeah, so that's looking pretty good actually. It's coming out of focus ever so slightly here. So I'm seeing here, I'm still getting some weird results. So another thing that you can change on the CD focus is we've got this math section. So if you hover over this, basically it will tell you the different kind of maths that you can use. And because this is currently set to far 0, we're actually going to change this. Instead of far 0, we're going to change this to depth because we're using a depth map. And that should, in theory, hopefully, now that's going to fix this. So if I up this maximum a little bit more, and I'm going to change the size to, let's say, 200. Then now I'm not getting as weird results there. So if you are getting strange results, maybe just have a play with these. So if I change back to another one, I'm probably going to get even weirder results. Like that, for example. Not quite right. So that's just a quick little thing that you can play with. I'm going to bring this back down now. Let's take that to 60. Cool. So next up, now that I've got this, what I want to do is I want to bring out some of the highlights on this. Just give it a bit of a glow where the really hot light is hitting it, just to make it look a little bit less CG. So I'm going to use a grade node for that, just to kind of pick out the bits that are brightest. So I'm going to view this and we're going to use it as a mask for a glow node. So I'm just going to do this and maybe bring that down ever so slightly. Then after this, I'm going to drop on a glow node, see how that looks. And then I'm going to merge that back on top ever so slightly. So what I've done here is I've changed it to effect only so that we're just getting the glow from that node. And then I'm just plussing it on top just to give it, I don't want it to be too much. I don't want it to look ethereal, but it's just helping pick out, especially on these golds. That's quite nice. And what I can do now is I can play with this grade node if I want more or I want less. So that was way too much. But if I really pump this up just to demonstrate what that's doing, if I pump up this plus node, then what I can do is I can now edit this. Say, for example, if I just wanted these really tight highlights here, then I've got that there. And I can change the glow as well. If we want more, we want less. I can change the size of it as well. So now I've got that. I'm just going to bring that back down because that's a bit too much. But I think that's quite nice. That's looking okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to set up a little bit of chromatic aberration. And to do that, I need the shuffle node again. Because what I'm going to do is, chromatic aberration is basically when a lens is a bit crappy, it splits color out. The color waves get refracted or whatever it is, ever so slightly different amounts. So red versus blue, because of wavelengths and signs and stuff. So we're going to replicate that by splitting out the red, the green, and the blue, and we're going to transform them different amounts. So what I need to do is I need to go on the shuffle node, and I'm going to make all my other channels 0. I'm going to keep the alpha as is, actually, just so it's 1. Then I'm going to do the same on the blue. Well, actually, let's do green first. So I'm going to make, for green, I'm going to make all these others 0. And then for blue itself, I'm going to keep blue at that and then change the others. So now what I'm going to add is I'm going to use this node called lens distortion, which is probably really technical, but I'm going to use it for its most basic functionality to just add a little bit of distortion around the edges. Nothing too major, just to make it look slightly nicer. So I'm going to keep lens type spherical. I'm going to keep all this stuff as it is. I'm just going to change the output to redistort. And then we're going to change, so I'm going to view this now. And we're going to change this to 0.01, just a really small amount, because you'll see if I change that to 1, it's going to go a bit crazy. We want just 0.1. And then on the blue, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make that minus. So they're basically going to distort different amounts, and the green is going to stay as it is. The reason I had to split this out is because if I did this on this first node, it would distort them all the same, but I want to distort the red and the blue different amounts. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to use a merge node. So I press M, and I'm just going to start joining these together. And so all I need to do is I need to plus these together, because as you can see here, this is just the green channel, this one's just the red channel, and this one's just the blue channel. So if I add them together, they're going to just sit on top of each other nicely. And that should, in theory, create some chromatic aberration for us. So now if I view this, and then you can see up here, I've got exactly what I wanted. So the red has distorted the most, and then the blue has kind of distorted inwards. If I turn that off and I turn that off, then we've got the normal image. So that's looking pretty nice. And the thing with chromatic aberration is to keep it as subtle as possible. People like to go really overboard on it. I think actually that's probably a little bit too much, but if you're viewing the image like this, then that's quite nice. Also, I'm just going to thank, so Josh Parks, I don't know if anybody knows his stuff, but he runs Compositing Pro. He's the one that taught me this all those years ago at uni. So thanks to him. Cool. So now that I've got those ones done, what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to start grading it so it looks a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to use a color correct node. Some people say not to use the color correct node and you should just use the grade node, or it's either the way around. Again, I'm not a compositor, so I just do whatever looks best. So I'm just going to do what looks best, and it might be technically wrong. And in that case, I probably shouldn't be doing a tutorial about it, but here you can change the master, the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. So I'm just going to change it a little bit till I get something that I kind of like. I don't want to make it too saturated because that looks ridiculous. But what I can do is I can change the shadows, for example. I can desaturate just them. So in here, it goes a little bit desaturated. I actually quite like that. That was a bit too much. But I'm going to bring that down ever so slightly. This gold is looking quite saturated. But then I could also bring the highlights up. But now it's gone too yellow. One of the nice things about this as well is you can add color. So on the right, everything's set to white. But if you wanted to add just like a little bit of color into the shadows, for example, say you wanted to make them more blue, you can click this here and then start, if you go onto gain, so gain basically just adds that color into that part of the image. So I'm going to add just a little bit of blue into it. And I'm going to play around with adding a bit into the highlights. Probably going to remove it, but just to show what it does. You can see there, you can see really obviously what it's doing. Maybe a bit of cyan? No, I'm not really. No, I'm going to reset that. I'm just going to set that to 1, 1, 1 again. And then I can click off that to change it back to these. Let's have a look what else we can do. Maybe the midtones, a bit more contrast there. No, don't like that. What you can do as well, so shadows, midtones, and highlights, to define what they are, you can go to the ranges thing and you can change these curves so that, for example, that affects, the shadows now affect more values. I'm going to undo that, but that is there if you wanted to really play around with that. So next I'm going to add a radial node because I want to make a vignette. So if I just drop this radial node here, you can see it adds this box, and I'm just going to put this around here. If I view this, my project isn't set up to the right size, which is why I'm getting it cropped a little bit. So I'm just going to hit S here inside of this node graph bit, and that brings up my project. And if I go to the bottom, it should usually is quite good, and it adds these formats that are from your images that you're coming in. So now that lines up a bit better. And so as you can see, I'm getting this radial node where it's white in the middle and dark on the outside. So if I merge that on top, let's see what that does. So I want to multiply just the edges. And there you go. You can see it's doing that. Problem is that's a bit too much. So what I could do is I could either go and change this. I could make this bigger. And that would help it. Or you can also play around. If I go back to this radial node, you can play around with the softness of it to, if I bring that back down, to make it go more in and out. But yeah, usually I just size it up a bit. And I really just want the corners, because all you're doing is you're trying to make it look a little less CG. So that sizing is probably fine. I'm just going to bring down the multiply. Oh, it doesn't like that. Is that because... Yep. Cool. The reason I didn't like that is because my A and B were incorrect. So I want the radial to go on top of the image that I've got already. So pressing Shift and X will switch those around. So it's A multiplies over B, so the radial now multiplies over my image correctly. And then I can just change that a bit. Cool. Something else I always add is I add a bit of grain. If we zoom in, we can just see that. I'm going to disable and re-enable. It's a bit too much, so I can change the intensity. I'm going to change that to just 0.25. 0.25. You don't want to add too much of this because it's going to get rid of your details. And then I can press D to disable that node on and off and see what it's doing. So even that's probably a bit too much, but I'm going to leave it on just because on YouTube the compression, you might not really see it otherwise. And then another one you can do that I like to do sometimes, depending on the asset, is you can use a sharpen. So I'm just going to press Tab and go to sharpen, see how that looks. I think this is going to... Problem is because this is skin and it's got all the subsurface detail, that is looking a bit crappy and it's really going to town on these hairs. But if I have a look down here, I quite like this golden collar being a little bit crisper just to bring out some of the specular roughness detail that I had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the sharpen down a little bit to something that I like. So 0.16 is quite nice. Again, I'm still not really liking that on the skin. Kind of like this softer bit. It's quite nice on the eyes though as well. So what I can do is I can mask this off into just certain areas. So what I'm going to do is, to do that, I need a roto node. Can't spell roto. And we're going to plug that in. Cool. So now we've got this roto, and again, I'm not a comper, so this node always confuses me. But basically, you can just draw, and you can drag and draw to get nice Beziers. And if you want straight ones, you can just click and not drag. So I'm just going to quickly surround this. If you were doing it properly, I'd probably spend a bit more time on that because that's not great. So let's just move that ever so slightly. And then you can also, so now I've got this one Bezier, and if I view that, you will see I'm going to hit A to view the alpha because it's going to do it as an alpha. And then I can just change the feather of that if I didn't like what I had. But I'm going to just do it a little bit actually, and I'm going to bring the feathering up, and I'm going to bring this fall off in a bit. I don't want it to go too outside. If I bring this fall off to 10, what if I make it -10? Will that do anything? Nope, not a good idea. Cool, so that looks all right. If I can press A again to not view the alpha. So if I enable that and disable that, you can see it's not affecting the skin, but it is affecting this. I'm going to turn this up in case it's not visible. If I disconnect that, you can see it affects everywhere. And then, so let's change that to 1.6 again. So let's just quickly do that to one of the eyes as well. So I need to go back to my roto node. And if I go up here on the left-hand side, I always forget how you do this, but to add another Bezier, then if I go to this Bezier tool again, it's going to add another one into this root directory. And I'm going to be really crap with this. I hate working with Beziers, actually. There we go. Go back to that one. Click along. And let's see. So now you saw that activate because that's now in this mask as well. And if I enable and disable that, then it's helping bring out some of that eye detail quite nicely, actually. So yeah, that's working quite well. And if I want to get rid of that, so I'm viewing that on my image now. And for example, this roto thing, if these are annoying you, you can just go up here into your properties and click that to get rid of them. Cool. Another tip I sometimes use just to make my image look a little bit more dynamic is you can use a ramp just to add a little bit of color. So I'm going to A over B, so that ramp goes there, and I'm just going to make this ramp. First of all, I'm going to choose where it is. So I want 0.1, say here, 0.0 here. So I just want a little bit of light kind of leaking in. I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to set it to, let's do magenta for now so you can really see what's happening. I'm going to view that, and there you go. That's horrible, obviously. But if I do, so I can do over, or I could do plus because it's light, and then I can make that really, really subtle. Like that. If I press this button again to clear it, so that ramp thing's moved. Again, a horrible color, but If I change that to maybe something a little less saturated. Something a bit cooler that goes with the image. And I'm going to change that merge to even less. I'm going to make it 0.5. So that's another little thing I like to do just to help an image along. So because I'm using the Nuke non-commercial here, if I try to write this out, currently you can see my resolution is higher than HD. Nuke non-commercial only works with HD images and below. So I need to reformat this image. So let's just do that. And I just want to make this HD so I can write it out correctly. So output format, instead of what it currently is, I'm just going to change that to full HD, which is somewhere. Have I already gone past it? There we go. Cool. So now that's reformatted my image. And that's ready to write out now. Cool. So that was a little deep dive into how I comp things in Nuke. Again, I'm not a comper, so take this all with a pinch of salt. I just thought it was potentially a useful technique to kind of go through. Nuke can be quite an overwhelming piece of software, especially when you're coming at it fresh. So especially with things like shuffle copying. So hopefully that was useful. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them below. Again, not a proper Nuke person. I know how to use it enough to get by, but I'll try and answer everything that you send my way. Cool. I've been Michael Wild. I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to have more tutorials coming your way soon, so watch this space. Maybe a few more live streams. Ooh, 21st century. Yeah, cool. Take it easy. Have a good one. Cheers.